I'm Caroline Hart, 31, and on Easter Sunday I set a basket of warm rolls on my parents' table, just as my brother announced that not everyone can handle a real career in tech. Forks paused midway, steam rising from the ham, and that old hush settled over the room like a familiar quilt. Noah leaned back comfortable in the space he's always been given, while I measured out the silence and chose again not to disturb it. Grandma Eleanor tapped her water-glass eyes, never leaving me, and asked if I had ever bought a company for sentimental reasons. The question floated there gentle and heavy at once, and I felt my pulse answer before my voice did. My mother folded her napkin twice, as if tidiness could keep peace from slipping. My father cleared his throat, ready with a joke that would move us along. I reached for the carrots and knew as surely as I knew the weight of that serving spoon that the story in this family was about to change. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to carry your worth quietly while someone else took the room. I grew up in a small Midwestern town where winter coats hung by the back door, and Sunday dinner meant passing dishes clockwise starting with Grandma. My parents taught us to be useful before we tried to be impressive, which in practice looked like shoveling the walk, writing thank you notes, and remembering who needed the last piece of pie more than we did. Noah discovered computers early and made friends with every blinking cursor he met. Neighbors brought him routers and praise, and the living room filled with the confident language of people who knew exactly what to admire. I was the kid who liked to see how things fit together, how a sign on a shelf changed where people stood, how a schedule rearranged a team, how a good question opened a door that had been stuck for years. It was not the kind of talent that drew applause at holiday gatherings. It was the kind you practiced alone, then carried into rooms that did not have a nameplate for you yet. By the time Noah was building apps in high school, I was captaining the debate team and charting patterns in a notebook I kept hidden under a stack of magazines. He took victory laps. I took notes on why certain ideas landed. In our house, success looked like code that compiled and screens that lit up on demand, and no one meant any harm by it. Still, I learned that the easiest way to keep dinner pleasant was to summarize my week in one sentence and hand the conversation back to my brother. When we left for college, his scholarship letter rode on the refrigerator for months, curling at the corners, while mine stayed in a folder inside my desk. The letters were not a competition, I told myself. We were simply moving in different directions, and family is easier when you let the current choose who gets the wind at their back. The first time I saw the Bay Area skyline, I was 22, with a suitcase that listed to the right and a job that sounded simple: help good ideas become products people could actually use. Northlake Dynamics was not flashy from the outside, but inside it was a machine built to notice and to build, to ask who would adopt a thing, and who would resist it, and what had to change. So the answer was more than yesterday. I started in product operations and learned to translate between teams that loved numbers and teams that loved stories, between timelines and budgets, and the stubborn truth of physics that says you cannot fit 5 weeks into 3. It was not glamorous work. It was work that made other work possible, and it suited me the way a well-worn sweater fits on the first cold day. When I visited home, Noah's updates unfurled across the table features. Launched investors impressed a late night saved by a brilliant fix at 2 in the morning. My parents' faces brightened the way faces do when the path is clear and the markers are obvious. I kept my stories shorter and softer, careful not to sound like I was contradicting the narrative we had worn in for years. Grandma Eleanor would tilt her head and ask 1 or 2 tidy questions. Who needs what? Where are the bottlenecks? What happens if you move that piece first? And I would answer just enough to satisfy her without rattling any other dishes. It worked until the day the old arrangement started to feel less like peace and more like a locked door. I built a life marked by checklists and coffee, with my name written right by coworkers who trusted me to see around corners, by young engineers who knocked on my door because I kept a whiteboard clean and a chair pulled out for whoever needed to think out loud. At 31, I was aware I had promised myself I would be steady and respected, but still invisible, at our family table in all the familiar ways. Noah had launched VoltNest by then, an energy optimization startup with a smart idea and a lean team. My parents wore the name like a badge on their coats. I wore my title like a quiet promise, and I did not ask anyone to read it. What changed did not feel dramatic when it began. It was a Tuesday, with rain on the windows and a cold bagel at my elbow, a day like any other, when a scouting packet slid across my desk and a name near the top lifted my eyes. I recognized the product concept first, then the founder's last name, and for a second or two I heard nothing but the hum of the office, as if it were a long hallway, and I had started running without moving at all. Northlake's process is careful. Conflicts are flagged and distance is kept. Stillpaper has a way of asking questions we've been avoiding, and numbers do not care if you share a last name with the person behind the code. I put the packet down and went for a walk that did not look like a walk, just a loop from my desk to the kitchen and back, passing teams with their heads bent toward the same goal they had yesterday. The rain cleared the charts, stayed where I left them, and I remembered Grandma's habit of sliding a puzzle box toward me and saying, "Start with the corners." I knew which corners mattered. I also knew why they would be hard to say aloud in a house where the story had always been simple and our roles had been so easy to tell apart. I stood at the window until my reflection stopped looking surprised, and then I went back to my chair, because that is what you do when the work in front of you is true and the person across the table is family. Easter Sunday came with its usual rituals: hollow chocolate, a vase of tulips, chairs squeezed in at the end for anyone who might still arrive, and I took the seat I always take beside Grandma and across from the point where my brother's voice naturally lands. When Noah made his remark about real careers, I felt the old script line up like train cars waiting for the predictable exchange that would move us past anything that might pinch. But Grandma's question landed first, soft as a hand on a shoulder and impossible to ignore. I looked at the basket of rolls and the shining platter and the people who had taught me how to pass both with care, and I realized that what I said next would not just be an answer. It would be the first time I turned the handle on that locked door. Grandma's question lingered in the air long after the laughter had drained from the room. My fork rested halfway between my plate and the table, and I could feel everyone waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I smiled faintly and reached for my water instead. The glass trembled slightly in my hand, but I set it down quietly and let the moment pass. Mom busied herself with the gravy boat. Dad cleared his throat and changed the subject, asking about someone's garden. But I saw Noah watching me, confusion flickering behind that easy grin of his. He didn't yet know what Grandma already suspected, that for once the story everyone believed wasn't the truth. When I was a kid, moments like that never happened. Back then, the spotlight was firmly Noah's. He was the one people called gifted. By age 12, he was already fixing modems for the neighbors and getting paid in pizza boxes and praise. At church, adults patted his shoulder like they were shaking hands with a young genius. Teachers called him a prodigy, and my parents beamed through every award ceremony. I cheered from the audience and clapped until my palms stung. It wasn't envy, it was habit. In the Hart family, Noah's brilliance was tradition. I wasn't without ambition. Mine just didn't shine under fluorescent lights or sound impressive in conversation. While Noah was busy designing circuits and building code, I was sketching how people moved through systems, how designs affected choices, how small changes shaped behavior. I loved that kind of thinking, but it didn't translate well at dinner. When I tried to explain an idea, Noah would nod distractedly, half listening, and say it sounded marketable. That was his polite way of saying it wasn't technical enough to matter. By high school, the divide between us had a rhythm. He filled our parents' evenings with new inventions. I filled the background debate trophies, essays, student council work. None of it registered in the same key. My parents tried to be fair, but admiration has a weight, and most of it tilted his way. I learned early that silence was easier than explanation. The more I tried to be heard, the more out of tune I felt. So I learned to listen instead, to observe the way people responded to him, the words that opened doors, the pauses that held attention. It would take me years to realize how much power there was in noticing what others missed. Noah went to MIT with a full scholarship, the local papers proud to call him one of their own. I stayed closer to home at Northwestern, studying business analytics and behavioral economics. It sounded dull compared to computer science, and maybe that was part of why I chose it. Numbers told stories if you knew where to look, and I liked tracing cause and effect until the patterns made sense. When people asked about my major, I'd say I help tech people make things people actually want. They'd smile politely and move on to ask about Noah. The years after college felt like slow construction. I joined Northlake Dynamics as a product operations associate, an entry-level role with long hours and not much glory. My job was to take what engineers built and turn it into something that could be released without chaos. It meant late nights bug reports and endless calls translating between teams that barely spoke the same language. But it also meant learning every corner of how an idea became real. I found satisfaction in the work, even when no one outside the office cared to understand it. Meanwhile, Noah thrived in the spotlight again. He landed a job at a high-profile startup and was soon speaking at conferences. Every holiday he came home with stories about investors, beta launches, and industry buzz. Our parents soaked it up. At Thanksgiving, I'd sit across from him while he described his new project, VoltNest AI-driven energy optimization for corporate systems. He talked about it like a man certain he was building the future. I listened proud but cautious. He had the kind of charisma that made people forget how fragile success can be. By then, I had earned 2 promotions and a small team under me. I was the bridge between business and engineering, the quiet force that made sure timelines met reality. When coworkers succeeded, I cheered. When projects fell apart, I was the one patching the seams. And still at family gatherings, I was the marketing daughter, the one with nice presentations but no real tech experience. Once Noah joked that I was a PowerPoint specialist. I smiled and told him I was the reason those slides represented something worth funding. He laughed. No one else did. The comment was forgotten by dessert, but I remembered. The truth is, I didn't resent him then. I accepted that our parents understood his world better. Code was tangible. My kind of work wasn't. So I stopped explaining it. I told myself keeping the peace mattered more than recognition. But that quiet cooperation had its cost. Over the years, it became harder to tell where respect ended and invisibility began. Grandma Eleanor never joined those conversations. She had raised children in a different time when success wasn't about title or stock options. She'd watch Noah talk, then turn to me with a look that said she saw through the noise. "You're building something solid, honey," she once told me over tea. "One day they'll realize it." I believed her because she never said things just to be kind. That winter, Northlake's leadership team began reviewing small tech startups for acquisition. My division focused on strategic integration, identifying ideas that could strengthen our long-term roadmap. It was dry work to anyone outside the company spreadsheets and risk models mostly, but I loved the challenge. One cold morning, my team lead handed me a stack of preliminary reports. I skimmed the first page, then stopped. The name at the top was unmistakable: VoltNest. For a long moment, I stared at the logo. It looked smaller on paper than it did in my brother's stories. I turned to the financials, tracing the burn rate and revenue columns. The numbers were worse than I expected. Expenses outpaced income 5-1. Funding had stalled. Customer adoption was flat. The algorithms were clever, but the operations were falling apart. I felt an ache that was part sympathy, part disbelief. The startup that had once filled every family dinner conversation was now on the brink of collapse. The right thing, the professional thing, was to step back. I emailed my VP disclosing the conflict of interest immediately. She thanked me and reassigned me to an advisory-only role for the evaluation. That meant no direct negotiation or voting power, but I could help assess technical fit and identify risks. It also meant watching quietly as my brother's company became one of several under review. I told myself it was just another project file, but that was a lie I didn't quite believe. Weeks passed. The acquisition review moved forward. Analysts confirmed what I already suspected: the technology was brilliant, the leadership unsustainable. VoltNest's structure was built entirely around Noah's ideas, but he had no COO, no marketing strategy, no plan to scale. What he had was beautiful code with nowhere to go. Northlake wanted his algorithms, not his management. I made sure the process stayed fair and documented every comment logged, every conflict transparent. It wasn't my job to protect him or to punish him. My only responsibility was the truth. Outside of work, nothing seemed different. We gathered for Mom's birthday dinner that month, and Noah spoke animatedly about upcoming partnerships. He had no idea how close those partnerships were to evaporating. I stayed quiet, spooning soup and pretending not to notice Grandma's knowing glance. She could tell something had shifted. Maybe she sensed the tension underneath my calm. Maybe she just knew families like ours eventually reach a reckoning. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about pride. I wanted his dream to survive, even if that meant it had to change hands. But I also knew that when the truth came out, and it always does, it would shake the story our family had lived by for decades. And so on that Easter afternoon when Grandma asked her question and the table went still, I finally understood what she had been waiting for. She had seen this moment coming long before either of us did. The room had grown quiet again, only the faint sound of silverware shifting against plates. I could feel Noah's eyes on me, searching for an answer that hadn't been spoken yet. I knew what the next words would mean. They wouldn't just correct a misunderstanding, they would rewrite our family's favorite story. So I took a breath, steady and deliberate, knowing that whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The next few weeks stretched like an uneasy silence I couldn't break. I went to work, joined meetings, and walked through the same glass corridors, but a strange heaviness followed me everywhere. Knowing that Voltnest was under review by my own company felt like standing on a narrow bridge between two worlds, family on one side, truth on the other. I kept my voice measured in every discussion, careful not to let a flicker of personal connection show. My notes stayed factual, my feedback stayed neutral. But every night, when I shut my laptop, the weight of what I knew pressed a little harder. At home, Daniel noticed the shift right away. He'd watch me stir a pot of soup or fold laundry in silence, waiting for me to speak. One night, I finally did. I told him everything, how Noah's company had landed on our shortlist, how bad the numbers really were, and how Grandma's question at Easter had cracked the shell of our family's illusion. He didn't interrupt, just listened the way he always did, hands folded, eyes steady. When I finished, he said quietly, "You've been carrying both ends of the rope for a long time, Caroline. You can't keep holding them forever." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to let go of either. At the office, the review reports kept landing on my desk. The deeper the analysts dug, the more the problems surfaced. Voltnest's tech was brilliant, but their structure was chaos. Payroll outpaced funding, customer retention barely existed, investor confidence was gone. The algorithms Noah had built were strong enough to attract attention, but without a leadership overhaul, the company would collapse within months. Every chart told the same story. And no matter how I looked at it, the conclusion stayed the same. His work could survive, but his company couldn't. One evening, as I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed. A family group text lit up Mom, reminding everyone about her birthday dinner that weekend. I almost replied to say I'd be late, but something stopped me. I already knew how that dinner would go. Noah would talk about strategic opportunities and scaling partnerships, and our parents would nod proud and certain he was still on the rise. I would smile, ask questions, and swallow the truth sitting in my throat, just like always. When Saturday came, the house smelled like rosemary and baked chicken. My mother had laid out the good china, the one with the faint gold trim she saved for holidays. Noah arrived 20 minutes late, breezing in with his usual energy, greeting everyone with hugs and compliments. He kissed Grandma's cheek, clapped Dad on the back, and handed Mom a bouquet of tulips. Then halfway through dinner, he launched into his usual monologue, this time about potential acquisition talks and expansion into new sectors. I stared at my plate, hearing every word, but trusting none of them. Across the table, Grandma Eleanor's fork paused. Her eyes met mine for a moment, sharp questioning. She could always tell when something didn't add up. I gave a small shake of my head. Not now. But she understood anyway. When the cake came out, she leaned close and whispered, "The truth doesn't go away just because no one says it." Then she patted my hand and smiled for the camera when Dad asked us to pose. I held the smile too, but it felt like paper thin and temporary. The following week at work, our VP scheduled a final strategy meeting to discuss Voltnest's acquisition potential. I wasn't in the negotiation chain, but I sat in the back of the room listening as the discussion unfolded. The verdict was unanimous. Northlake Dynamics would move forward with an offer not for the company, but for the technology and its team. My name was listed on the report as part of the advisory committee. My chest tightened as I saw it in print. I'd done everything by the book, but that wouldn't matter when my brother found out. The deal closed faster than anyone expected. Legal teams handled the details. Press releases were drafted. Integration plans were drawn up. By the time Noah received the official notification, the news was already public. He called that night, his voice unusually calm. "Hey, did you know about this?" he asked. "Northlake buying Voltnest." I swallowed before answering. "I did," I said carefully. I disclosed the conflict and wasn't part of the decision. He was silent for a moment. "Huh. Guess that's business," he said finally, though his tone carried an edge I couldn't miss. We hung up a few minutes later, both pretending everything was fine. Days later, a new memo circulated all acquired startups would begin integration assessments in early April. Noah's name appeared under technical review team. Mine was on strategic oversight. It was official. For the first time, our professional worlds were no longer parallel. They were crossing. I stared at the document until the words blurred. The line we'd both pretended didn't exist had just been erased. At home, Daniel found me sitting at the kitchen counter staring at the contract summary. He poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one toward me. "You can't control how he takes it," he said softly. "You can only control how you tell it." I nodded, though I wasn't sure when or where that conversation would happen. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about years of unspoken hierarchy, about who got to speak and who stayed quiet. By the time Easter rolled around, the deal had closed and the papers were signed. The family gathered again, this time at my parents' house. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the long dining table. Everything looked the same: linen napkins, roasted vegetables, laughter. But underneath it all, I felt the current of something waiting. Noah was in high spirits, telling everyone about new collaborations and future growth, never once mentioning the acquisition. Our parents beamed proud as ever. Grandma listened quietly, her expression unreadable. Halfway through lunch, Noah leaned back and smirked, his voice light but cutting. "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech," he said, the same way he always did when he wanted to remind me who the genius was. A few people chuckled politely. I didn't move. Then Grandma set her fork down and looked straight at him. "Is that why Caroline bought your company, out of pity?" The room froze. Mom gasped softly. Dad's knife hit the plate with a dull scrape. Noah blinked, laughing uncertainly. "What are you talking about?" he said. But Grandma's gaze didn't waver. "I'm asking," she replied simply, "because she looks more capable than pitiful to me." My heart thudded against my ribs. Every eye turned toward me. The air in the room felt heavy, like it might split. For a second, I wanted to deflect, to keep peace like I always had. But then I saw Grandma's calm face, the quiet expectation in her eyes. The silence had lasted long enough. I placed my fork down and spoke evenly. "I didn't buy your company," I said. "My company did. I led the team that recommended the acquisition." No one moved. Noah's smile faltered, confusion flashing to disbelief. "You," what he said, laughing once as if it were absurd. "You're not even in acquisitions." "I wasn't," I answered. "Now I am." Mom's hand fluttered toward her glass, unsure where to rest. Dad blinked like he'd just missed a step on the stairs. Grandma leaned back slightly, watching it unfold. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Noah leaned forward, his voice rising. "So what, you took over my company?" Out of pity, I met his eyes. "No. We bought Voltnest because your tech was valuable, because it deserved to survive." His chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "That's not survival," he snapped. "That's surrender." Grandma spoke softly, but her words carried. "No, Noah. It's competence." No one breathed. It was as if the truth had finally landed in a room that had been waiting years to hear it. I could feel my hands trembling beneath the table, but I didn't look away. For once, the story was mine to tell, and I wasn't about to let it fade back into silence. Across from me, Noah's face shifted, anger first, then something rawer, harder to name. The kind of look that comes when certainty begins to crack. I knew this wasn't the end of it. We still had years of imbalance between us, and now every one of them was standing in that room. But as the table fell silent again, I realized the hardest part wasn't speaking. It was choosing not to take the words back once they were out. The room stayed still for a long time before Mom finally whispered, "Maybe we should take a break." But the pause had already happened, and what came next would decide whether we could ever find level ground again. The quiet after Mom's whisper stretched longer than anyone knew how to fill. Dishes cooled on the table, sunlight flickered through the lace curtains, and the weight of what had just been said pressed down on everyone. I didn't move. Across from me, Noah's jaw was tight, his expression unreadable, his fork abandoned beside the plate. Grandma Eleanor sat calm as a pond, watching without blinking. The moment didn't feel like victory. It felt like something old had cracked open and was finally breathing air for the first time. Dad cleared his throat, but no words followed. Mom looked between us, her napkin twisted in her hands. Then Noah stood the scrape of his chair, sharp against the floor. "You really think this is funny?" he said quietly. No one answered. His voice rose. "You wait until my company's in trouble, then swoop in like some corporate savior." I could see the tremor in his hands, that mix of pride and disbelief. "You didn't save me, Caroline. You embarrassed me." I stood slowly, not to challenge him, but to steady the air between us. "No, Noah," I said. "I didn't do any of this to embarrass you." My words came out calm, almost measured. Voltnest wasn't failing because of me. It was failing because no one stepped in to help when it needed it most. What I did, what Northlake did, kept your team employed, kept your technology alive. That wasn't about family. That was about work. He laughed once, a short sound with no humor in it. "You've been waiting for this," he snapped. "All these years playing quiet little sister, pretending not to care. And now you get to be the one in control." Something inside me shifted. "Control," I repeated. "You think this was about control? I've spent years sitting at this table listening while you told everyone how real tech works. You built amazing code, Noah, but you never built a company. You didn't have to think about payroll or market strategy or customer retention. Those weren't your worlds, so you dismissed them. You dismissed me." The room was silent, except for the sound of a clock ticking somewhere behind us. Mom tried to speak, but Grandma lifted a hand, stopping her. Noah's face flushed. "You're twisting this," he said, his voice cracking. "You're just—" He stopped himself, breathing hard. I saw the flicker in his eyes, something like hurt buried under the anger. "You think I didn't respect you? You never said a word. You never told me what you actually did." "I tried," I said softly. "You just never listened." He stared at me for a long moment before turning toward the door. "I need air," he muttered and left the room. The front door closed with a solid thud that seemed to rattle the silverware. Grandma's voice broke the silence. "Let him go," she said gently. "He needs to sit with it." I sank back into my chair, hands trembling now that the adrenaline had drained away. Mom reached across the table and placed her palm over mine. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "we had no idea." Dad exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. "Caroline, you mean to tell me your team, your company, they bought Voltnest?" I nodded once. "You never said anything." His voice was quiet, almost stunned. "I wasn't supposed to," I said. "It was part of my role. The deal had to stay confidential until it closed." Mom's eyes darted toward Grandma. "You knew?" she asked. Grandma smiled faintly. "I suspected. I know what it looks like when someone's been underestimated for too long." No one spoke after that. The weight of the conversation had emptied every corner of the room. Then Aunt Clara, who'd been silent the whole time, said softly, "Well, she didn't do it for pity." A faint, awkward laugh rippled through the table, easing the tension just enough for everyone to breathe again. After a while, people began clearing plates, grateful for something to do. Mom busied herself in the kitchen, clinking dishes into the sink, while Dad stepped out onto the porch to check on Noah. I stayed where I was, letting the hum of small movements fill the silence that words couldn't. Grandma leaned toward me, her voice low. "You handled that with grace," she said. "But make sure you find him before the night ends. Pride breaks slower than glass." I nodded. She was right. I could still feel the unfinished edge in my brother's anger, sharp and unhealed. Outside, the air was cool, the kind that carried every sound a car passing in the distance. A lawnmower somewhere down the block, the faint chirp of crickets. I spotted Noah sitting on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the gravel driveway. I hesitated before joining him, leaving a few feet of space between us. For a while, neither of us said a word. "She really said that, huh?" he murmured after a long minute. "Grandma." "She did," I said. He gave a humorless chuckle. "She's always liked you better." "She sees both of us," I said quietly. "That's all." He sighed, the sound heavy. "You humiliated me in there." "I didn't plan to," I said. "But you gave me no choice when you said what you said." He nodded slowly, not looking at me. "That line," he said. "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech." "I've said that for years. It's like a reflex. I didn't even think." "That's the problem," I replied gently. "You didn't think about how it landed, about what it meant." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Because I thought you were fine. You never corrected me. I thought it wasn't worth the fight, I said." Keeping peace felt easier than being seen for who I was. But peace like that? I paused. It's just silence with better manners. He stared out toward the yard. "So how bad was Voltnest really?" "Bad," I said honestly. "Your tech was great, but the business was bleeding. You were 3 months from layoffs." He didn't react right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I knew we were in trouble. I just thought, one more funding round, one more breakthrough. "I know," I said. "You believed in it, and you should have. But sometimes believing isn't enough. Sometimes you have to let someone else help." He turned to look at me, then the anger gone, replaced by something softer. "You really led the team that flagged us for acquisition," I nodded. "I recused myself from the final deal, but yes. I'm the reason Northlake found Voltnest." He exhaled, shaking his head. "So you saved me." "I saved your work," I said. "Your people, your technology. I didn't do it to rescue you. I did it because what you built mattered." He was quiet again. Then, almost under his breath, he said, "And now I work for you." "You work with us," I corrected. "You'll be reporting to Owen Mercer in technical integration. He's fair. You'll learn a lot from him." He smiled faintly, a tired kind of smile. "And you?" "I'll still be in strategy," I said, "but I'll be around." For the first time that day, his shoulders eased. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small stress ball with the Voltnest logo fading on one side. He turned it over in his palm, thumb tracing the worn print. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Being second, being wrong." "You're not second," I said softly. "You're just not alone anymore." He looked at me, eyes glassy in the porch light. "I've been a jerk," he said. I smiled. "An arrogant, stubborn, brilliant jerk." He laughed quietly, the sound catching both of us off guard. Fair. We sat there until the last streaks of daylight faded. When he finally stood, he held out his hand. I took it, feeling the familiar strength of his grip, and together we walked back toward the house. Through the window, I could see Grandma smiling, the faintest trace of relief on her face. When we stepped inside, the room fell quiet again. Every conversation paused forks midair. Grandma raised one eyebrow but said nothing. She didn't need to. Noah sat back down beside Mom, and I took my seat next to Daniel, who squeezed my hand under the table. Uncle Martin cleared his throat. "Everything okay out there?" "We're working on it," Noah said. It wasn't an apology, but it was closer than he'd ever been. Dinner resumed softer now. The conversations turned to baseball and spring plans, the kind of neutral topics families use when they're trying to find steady ground again. But underneath it all, a new kind of silence lingered, one that felt less like avoidance and more like space. As I looked around the table, I realized something had shifted. The hierarchy that used to define every family gathering had cracked, and though the room was still uneasy, the air felt clearer. Noah wasn't the only one being seen anymore. The night ended quietly. As people gathered coats and said their goodbyes, Grandma pressed a hand to my arm. "The truth can sting, Caroline," she whispered, "but it's the only thing that heals right." I nodded, her words settling deep. Out on the porch, I could hear Noah laughing faintly, with Dad, their voices low but steady. And for the first time in years, the sound didn't make me shrink. It made me exhale. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at work, at home, But for now, the storm had passed, leaving room for something new to grow. The week after Easter passed quietly, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. At work, the hallways of Northlake Dynamics buzzed with post-acquisition adjustments, teams being merged, systems synced, job titles updated. VoltNest's transition was officially underway. For most employees, it was just another acquisition, one of many that came and went each year. But for me, every email with that name in the subject line was a reminder that this one wasn't like the others. I kept my distance as much as the role allowed. Owen handled the technical integration, and I oversaw the broader transition plan. Our paths crossed in meetings where we spoke in the measured professional tone of people who knew the stakes. I didn't mention my last name, and no one asked. It helped that Noah hadn't told anyone yet. Whatever pride he'd lost that day at the table, he was keeping what remained close to the vest. One Friday afternoon, Owen stopped by my office. He leaned against the doorframe with a file in hand. "Your brother's sharp," he said. "Quiet, but sharp. He's digging into the new system faster than anyone expected." I nodded, grateful for the small mercy of competence. Owen glanced at me. "You sure you're good with this arrangement?" "I am," I said, though the truth was more complicated. He studied me a moment longer before setting the file on my desk. "He'll be fine," he said. "So will you." That weekend, Daniel and I drove out to my parents' house for Sunday dinner. It was calmer than usual. The air had that tentative ease that comes after a storm, too still, but not unpleasant. Mom met us at the door with hugs and the smell of lemon chicken. Dad was already in the living room flipping through the newspaper, but not reading it. When Noah arrived a few minutes later, there was no tension, just a quiet acknowledgement as he took his seat. Grandma sat near the head of the table, knitting in her lap, pretending not to watch us both. Dinner unfolded without drama. Conversation drifted to safe topics, weather errands, my parents' new garden project. Every so often I caught Noah's eyes across the table, and he'd look away quickly. It wasn't hostility anymore, just unfamiliar ground. Near the end of the meal, he cleared his throat and said, "So, integration's going well. The Northlake folks know what they're doing." Dad brightened immediately. "That's good news," he said. "We're proud of you, son." Noah hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "We'll make it work." After dinner, I stepped out onto the porch for air. The evening light spilled soft and gold across the yard. A few minutes later, Noah joined me, hands in his pockets. He leaned against the railing, staring out at the street. "You were right," he said quietly. "About everything." I didn't answer right away. He exhaled. It's strange realizing how small my world was. I thought leadership meant being the smartest person in the room. Turns out it means letting other people be good at what they do. He turned toward me, the faintest smile crossing his face. "You've been doing that for years, haven't you?" I shrugged. "It's what my job demands." He nodded slowly. "Maybe it's what being an adult demands, too." We stood there in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Then he said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad it was you. If VoltNest had to end up somewhere, I'd rather it be in your hands than anyone else's." I felt something ease inside me. Not forgiveness? Not yet, but the beginning of understanding. "It didn't end up in my hands," I said. "It ended up where it had a chance to grow." He smiled again, softer this time. "Still sounds like something you'd say." In the following weeks, our professional lives began to overlap more naturally. Meetings that once felt stiff turned into real collaboration. Owen often joked that he'd never seen two people who could argue strategy one minute and finish each other's sentences the next. Noah was learning quickly. He'd begun mentoring junior engineers, something I hadn't expected from him. His energy, once all ego, was finding direction. At home, Daniel noticed the shift. One night as we cooked dinner, he said, "You're lighter lately." I laughed. Maybe I finally stopped bracing for the next battle. He nodded, handing me a spoon. "Or maybe you stopped fighting one that already ended." He was right. For years, I'd been waiting for Noah to see me, to respect what I built. Now that he did, the need to prove myself had started to fade. A month later, Northlake hosted a spring mixer to celebrate the success of several integrations, VoltNest among them. The event took place on the top floor of our headquarters, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city lights. People mingled with drinks in hand, laughing over small victories, and late nights turned worthwhile. I arrived early with Owen to check on logistics. Noah showed up halfway through, dressed in his usual no-nonsense style dark jeans, crisp shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. He blended easily, chatting with both his old team and the Northlake staff. At one point, he approached me by the buffet. "You know this isn't as awkward as I thought it'd be," he said. "You're getting used to calling me boss," I teased. He grinned. "Not a chance." Then he glanced around the room. "Seriously, though, you built something impressive here. I get it now, the way you think about systems, about people. It's not just business for you." I looked at him. "And code's not just code for you," I said. "It's the same thing, just a different language." He raised his glass slightly. "To translations, then." I clinked mine against his. Later that evening, as speeches began, our VP thanked both teams for their hard work. "This acquisition wasn't just about technology," she said. "It was about recognizing talent and potential." She turned to us. "And sometimes that means discovering greatness in your own backyard." The audience applauded. I caught Noah's eye from across the room. For the first time, he didn't look embarrassed by the acknowledgement. He looked proud, and not just for himself. That night, as the event wound down, we stood near the window watching the lights below. "It's strange," he said, "but I'm glad it happened this way." "You mean losing the company?" I asked. "I mean learning what I didn't know," he said. "If it had gone differently, I'd probably still be chasing the same mistakes." He looked at me thoughtful. "You ever wonder how long you would have kept quiet if Grandma hadn't spoken up?" "Maybe forever," I admitted. "But she always did have good timing." He laughed, shaking his head. "I owe her then." I smiled. "You and me both." By summer, the new division had settled. VoltNest's technology, now rebranded under Northlake, was running smoothly, attracting new clients. My strategy team worked closely with Noah's integration unit, and for the first time our family name meant something we could both stand behind. When our parents came to visit the office in June, Mom brought cookies for the staff, and Dad wandered the halls asking what a tech stack was. They stopped in front of the leadership wall where our names appeared side by side under separate departments. Dad's face softened as he read them. "Both my kids," he said, his voice quiet but proud. Mom slipped her arm through his. "Looks like we raised two innovators after all." That evening after they left, I sat in the quiet of my office. Through the window, the skyline shimmered against the fading light. I thought of the years spent unseen, the patience it had taken to build a life no one noticed until it could no longer be ignored. And now, with the noise gone, I could finally hear what had been waiting underneath, all along the steady rhythm of something whole again. Still, part of me knew this wasn't the end. Families don't rewrite their stories in one night. But as I turned off the lights and stepped into the hallway, I felt certain that the next chapter, whatever it held, would be written in a different kind of language, one that finally spoke for both of us. By midsummer, the rhythm of life had shifted into something that finally felt steady. The tension that used to hum under every conversation had softened into something more manageable, fragile, but real. At Northlake, VoltNest's integration had become one of our biggest success stories. The algorithms Noah designed were improving system performance across every division, and the technical staff who once doubted the merger were now singing its praises. My days were full of planning meetings and client reviews, but for the first time in a long time, they didn't carry the quiet weight of family hiding beneath them. Noah had settled into his new role with a focus I hadn't seen before. Owen often mentioned how quickly he'd adapted how he asked questions instead of defending answers. He was still the sharpest voice in the room, but now he knew how to listen. There were days when we crossed paths in meetings and exchanged a glance that said more than words could manage a shared understanding that it had taken us years to arrive here, and neither of us wanted to lose it. Outside of work, our family began to find its own new balance. Grandma Eleanor invited us both to Sunday dinners again, her way of rebuilding the ritual without pretending nothing had happened. Those evenings were simpler than before, less boasting, more laughter that didn't feel forced. Sometimes Noah brought a bottle of wine, sometimes I brought dessert. Grandma would sit back and watch us talk, her eyes soft behind her glasses, like she was quietly keeping score of the healing she'd waited so long to see. One Sunday after dinner, she motioned for us to help her in the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of apple pie and dish soap. As we stacked plates, she said, "You two remind me of your grandfather and his brother, always competing, always circling the same finish line." She paused, rinsing a plate. Took them 30 years to realize they were running on the same team. Noah grinned. Guess we're ahead of schedule. Grandma smiled without turning. Barely. At work the next week, I was finalizing a proposal for North Lake's new renewable energy partnership when a meeting request appeared on my calendar joint presentation with technical integration to be co-led by Noah and me. The topic was simple, demonstrating how VoltNest's models could reduce processing time and environmental waste. But the timing 2 years after the company's founding and only 6 months after the acquisition made it symbolic. It would be our first time presenting as equals in front of the entire leadership board. We spent the next few evenings rehearsing in one of the smaller conference rooms, the kind with bad coffee and flickering lights. Noah paced through the technical sections, breaking down complex systems into clear examples while I refined the flow and client-facing language. We worked easily together, adjusting details, teasing each other over word choices. It wasn't just professional chemistry, it was something deeper built from the wreckage of years spent misunderstanding each other. The morning of the presentation, the conference hall buzzed with quiet energy. Rows of executives filled the seats, and the skyline gleamed behind them through the glass wall. Owen gave us an encouraging nod from the front row. When it was my turn to speak, I took a steadying breath and began outlining our roadmap, connecting strategy to innovation, the way I always had, bridging the technical with the practical. Then I handed it over to Noah, who walked the room through the data models with the same ease he once reserved for family bragging rights. Only this time, the room listened without resistance. When we finished, the applause felt different, earned, not polite. Owen stood and shook our hands, saying, "That's what partnership looks like." Noah laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. She did most of the talking. I smiled. He did most of the magic. The board approved the proposal unanimously, and the VP congratulated us both. As the room emptied, Noah turned to me and said quietly, "You know, for someone who used to just do marketing, you're not bad at this." I raised an eyebrow. "You're only realizing that now." He grinned. "Better late than never." Later that evening, I found him in the break room staring out at the city lights, a paper cup of coffee in hand. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. 6 months ago, I thought you were the enemy. And now I asked," he chuckled softly. "Now you're the one person I actually want in the room." The next few weeks moved quickly. The project gained traction, and with it came attention from the press. One afternoon, our communications director stopped by my office with a request for an internal feature article about the success of the VoltNest integration. "It's a good story," she said. "We'd like to highlight both you and your brother. A sibling partnership strategy meets engineering. It's perfect." I hesitated but agreed. When the article went live on the company site, the headline read, "Two Hearts, One Vision." The response surprised us. Employees left comments about teamwork leadership and family resilience. Even clients reached out impressed by the unity behind the project. At home, Mom printed the article and taped it to the fridge. Dad framed a copy for his office. When Noah saw it, he laughed, shaking his head. "We should have charged royalties." But there was pride in his voice this time, not sarcasm. In August, North Lake announced its annual Innovation Summit, a company-wide event that drew employees from every branch. The VP asked Noah and me to open the keynote with a short joint address about collaboration. We wrote our remarks together, balancing his technical precision with my storytelling. The night before the summit, we sat in my apartment, surrounded by note cards and half-empty mugs of coffee. Daniel watched from the couch, amused. "You two argue like you're editing a marriage vow," he said. Noah smirked. "We kind of are. For business." The next morning, the ballroom was packed. Noah took the stage first, speaking about learning to let go of control and trust other people's strengths. When it was my turn, I talked about the value of listening not as a form of patience, but as a form of leadership. Then we stood side by side for the closing lines, sharing the spotlight that had once divided us. The applause that followed was loud, genuine, and in its own way healing. Afterward, we stood backstage, the hum of voices still echoing through the doors. Noah glanced at me and said, "You know, I used to think winning meant being the one on stage alone. And now I asked, Now it means standing next to someone who makes you better. That night, Grandma called. Her voice was soft but steady. I watched the live stream, she said. Your grandfather would have been proud. He always said leadership runs in pairs, one to see the horizon, one to steer the ship. I smiled, listening to her words linger. Sounds about right, I said. Which one am I? She laughed. You're the one who learned how to steer without crashing the boat. As summer drew to a close, I realized how much had changed in such a short time. The resentment that once filled every silence between us had been replaced by something quieter, but stronger, mutual respect. At work, we were building momentum. At home, our parents were learning to see us both clearly for the first time. And in the middle of it all was Grandma, the steady heartbeat of our family, reminding us that truth doesn't break what's real, it only exposes what's worth keeping. Still, I could feel the next shift approaching the way you can sense rain before the clouds gather. Change had a way of testing what it built, and as fall came closer, I had no doubt that whatever came next would ask us both to prove just how far we'd truly come. Autumn arrived like a slow turning of pages, soft mornings, cooler air, and the kind of calm that makes you believe things might finally be right. The project Noah and I launched over the summer was thriving, and for the first time in years, our family gatherings didn't feel like an unspoken competition. Grandma Eleanor called it peace earned, not borrowed. I think she was right. Still, something in the air told me change was coming again. At work, the executive board was preparing for year-end reviews, and Northlake's CEO had announced an expansion initiative that would shift several departments, including mine. The company was evolving, and so were the people inside it. Noah was being considered for a lead position in a new innovation division, a move that would take him under Owen's mentorship and possibly send him overseas for a few months. I could tell he was excited but also uneasy, as if part of him worried about losing the balance he'd just found. The Friday before Thanksgiving, we stayed late at the office finalizing a report. The hallways were quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when everyone's already left for the weekend. Noah leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. You think I should take it? He asked. The London project. It's a big step, I said, and it's yours if you want it. He nodded, but his expression was distant. Feels strange, doesn't it? A year ago I was fighting to keep Voltnest alive. Now I'm being offered something I never even imagined. That's what growth looks like, I said gently. He smiled. You sound like Grandma. She's rubbed off on me. When we left the building, the city was wrapped in fog, the streetlights haloed in mist. We stood by the parking garage, saying our goodnights. Noah hesitated before getting into his car. You know, he said, I don't think I ever told you this, but I'm proud of you. I looked at him startled. Thank you. He shrugged, smiling faintly. Took me long enough to notice what was right in front of me. Then he drove off taillights, disappearing into the haze. The following week, our parents hosted Thanksgiving early, so Grandma could attend without the December chill. The table was warm with familiar smells, turkey rosemary stuffing her apple cobbler cooling on the counter. It felt like the kind of holiday I used to imagine as a child, but never quite experienced. When everyone sat down, Grandma raised her glass. To second chances, she said, and to families who figure out what matters before it's too late. Dinner was full of laughter. Noah told a story about one of Owen's tech mishaps at work, and even Dad laughed until his eyes watered. Daniel helped Grandma carry dessert to the table, and Mom leaned back smiling in quiet relief. It was simple and good. Then as we were clearing dishes, Dad turned to me and said, Caroline, why didn't you ever tell us how successful you've become? The question was soft, almost regretful. I paused, unsure how to answer. I guess I thought no one wanted to hear it, I said. Every time I tried, the conversation moved back to Noah. Mom's eyes filled. That's on us, she said quietly. We should have asked. Noah put a hand on my shoulder. You deserved more credit than I ever gave you. I made it hard for anyone else to see what you were doing. Grandma smiled faintly. Well, we're all seeing it now. She lifted her cup. Here's to clarity. We clinked glasses again, laughter soft but real. Something had shifted permanently. It wasn't grand or cinematic, just steady and sincere. After dinner, as everyone settled in the living room, I caught Noah watching the family with a look I hadn't seen before, peaceful, maybe even grateful. Later that evening, while Mom packed leftovers into foil trays, Noah pulled me aside. "You remember how you said growth looks different for everyone?" he asked. "I think I finally get what you meant." He took a deep breath. "I'm taking the London project." I smiled. "Good. You'll do great there." "I'm nervous," he admitted. "Not about the work, about leaving things here. We finally got it right." "It'll stay right," I said. "You earned this. We all did." He nodded, but I could see the emotion in his eyes. "Promise me you'll keep them grounded while I'm gone. Especially Dad. He still thinks I'm the one holding this family together." "You've done your part," I said. "It's okay to let go now." He laughed softly. "You and your wisdom again. Comes with the job title." When he left that night, Grandma walked him to the door. "Bring me back a tin of tea from Harrod's," she said. "And don't forget, no matter how far you travel, home is just the place that remembers who you really are." He kissed her cheek. "I won't forget." By early December, Noah had moved to London. We talked often video calls about his new team, the Rain, and how London coffee didn't taste quite the same. The distance didn't weaken what we'd rebuilt. If anything, it made it stronger. At work, his updates became a highlight of the week, his energy contagious across time zones. On the night of North Lake's year-end celebration, I stood near the back of the ballroom, watching colleagues laugh under strings of white lights. Owen approached, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You know, he said you and your brother did something rare here. You turned a merger into a partnership worth celebrating." I smiled. "We had help." He raised his glass. "To family, the hardest kind of team to manage." We laughed, clinking glasses lightly. As the evening went on, I found a quiet corner overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the winter cold. My phone buzzed Noah, sending a photo from London, a box of tea labeled Eleanor's Favorite Blend. Beneath it, his message read, "For Grandma. Tell her the mission's complete." I laughed softly, then typed back, "She'll be thrilled. We're all proud of you." His reply came quickly, "Right back at you." That night when I got home, Daniel was waiting with a mug of cocoa and a tired smile. "How was the party?" he asked. "Perfect," I said. "Just right." He handed me the mug. "And him?" "Doing well," I said. "Really well." We sat together on the couch, the soft hum of the heater filling the quiet. I thought of Grandma's words, how home remembers who you are, and realized that for the first time she was right about all of us. Winter would bring new challenges, new goals, new ways to test what we'd built. But tonight, the only thing that mattered was that we'd finally learned how to move forward without stepping over one another. Outside, snow began to fall, catching in the light from the street lamps. I watched it drift and thought of how far we'd come from silence and rivalry to this fragile, beautiful peace. And though I couldn't see him, I knew Noah was looking at the same night sky, a continent away, thinking the same thing. The next chapter hadn't begun yet, but the air already carried its promise. The first snow of the new year came quietly, soft flakes floating through the dark like they were in no hurry to land. I stood by the window of our apartment, watching the city disappear behind the white curtain. Daniel was asleep on the couch, a book open on his chest, and the warmth of the radiator hummed through the room. My phone buzzed on the table, a message from Noah. It was a photo from London, the office skyline at dawn, a steaming mug beside his laptop. Starting early, his message said, "Big presentation today." I smiled and typed back, "You've got this." His reply came a few seconds later. "Thanks, little sister. Wouldn't be here without you." I read it twice before setting the phone down. That quiet acknowledgement, once impossible between us, carried more meaning than any long apology ever could. In the weeks that followed, life found its rhythm again. Work was steady, our parents were well, and Grandma's health held strong. Every Sunday she insisted on her ritual phone call, checking in on both of us. "Noah tells me he's eating proper meals," she said one afternoon. "But I don't believe it until you confirm." I laughed. "He's doing fine, Grandma." She chuckled. "That boy needed a little grounding. You gave him that." In truth, she'd given it to both of us. She'd been the mirror we didn't know we needed, the one that showed us what love looked like when it refused to pick sides. By February, Noah returned home for a short visit. The moment he walked through the airport doors, Mom nearly dropped the welcome sign she'd made. He hugged her first, then Dad, and when he reached me, he just said, "Hey, boss," grinning, as he pulled me close. It was strange how normal it felt now. No edge, no rivalry, just family. That night we gathered at Grandma's house for dinner. She'd made her famous chicken pot pie, and the scent filled every corner of her small kitchen. Between bites, Noah shared stories from London, how the team there had adopted his Hart humor, how Owen had praised his leadership style. "You'd be proud," he said to Grandma. "I didn't correct anyone once all week." She laughed, her eyes sparkling. "I'm very proud. But remember, real leaders aren't the ones talking the loudest. They're the ones people choose to follow." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "You sound like Caroline," he said. Grandma winked. "She listens better than you." We all laughed at that, but beneath the humor was a quiet truth that made the room feel full. For the first time in our lives, we weren't competing for space in that house, we were sharing it. After dinner, Noah and I sat on the porch steps bundled in coats against the cold. The snow from earlier had melted into thin patches of ice along the railing. He looked out toward the street and said, "I used to think success meant proving everyone wrong. And now I asked. Now it means proving that people can change," he said. "That I can." He looked at me, then the same brother I'd grown up with, but softer somehow. "You did the harder thing," he added. "You stayed quiet long enough to understand what needed saying." I smiled. "I just stopped apologizing for taking up space." He laughed gently. "Yeah, well, I'm glad you finally did." When he left a few days later, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a continuation of something we'd rebuilt together, something grounded and real. As I watched him disappear through the airport gate, I realized that what we'd both been searching for all along wasn't validation. It was peace. Spring came early that year. At work, our department expanded again, and I was offered a promotion to Vice President of Strategic Growth. When I called to tell Grandma, she was quiet for a long moment before saying, "You know, Caroline, sometimes the best victories aren't loud. They're the ones that let you breathe." She was right. The success didn't feel like a triumph over anyone. It felt like balance, like a long exhale after years of holding it in. A few weeks later, we gathered again for Grandma's 83rd birthday. The living room glowed with soft light, and the air was filled with music and laughter. Noah joined through video call from overseas, his face bright on the tablet propped up beside the cake. As we sang, Grandma held up the screen and said, "You two are my greatest accomplishments." Her voice trembled, but her smile was steady. That night after the party, I sat beside her as she rested on the couch. "You know," she said, eyes half closed, "people spend a lifetime trying to win love when all they need to do is give it. That's how it comes back." I took her hand. "You taught us that." She squeezed my fingers lightly. "Then my work here is done." When I left her house that evening, the moon hung low over the quiet street, and the air smelled faintly of rain. I thought about everything that had brought us here, the silence, the hurt, the long road toward understanding, and felt something settle inside me. Justice. I realize doesn't always arrive like a reckoning. Sometimes it comes as peace in the way hearts finally learn to rest after being at war for too long. Life isn't about outshining someone else, it's about becoming someone who no longer needs to. Before I go, I want to leave you with this. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've carried your worth quietly while others took the spotlight, know this, your moment will come and it won't need applause to be real. Thanks for listening to my story. If it touched you, share it with someone who might need the reminder that healing is its own kind of victory. And wherever you are tonight, I hope you find the peace you've been waiting for.